Alright, my name is Craig Finley, and I'm responding to some questions that Curtis asked me to address, I think to maybe stimulate some discussion in your classroom. The questions are: what types of summit assessments do you conduct in your classroom to help help determine student marks? How do you generate a grade in your classes? And what are some ways that you and your school communicate student achievement to students and parents? So these are very rich questions, actually, and represent a lot of the things that we're talking about currently at our school. We're in the midst of part of high school redesign and curriculum redesign discussions, which are some huge changes coming down the pipe for all of us, and a lot of these questions are at the center of that, so it's quite timely, actually. So again, my name is Craig Finley. I currently teach at Chinook High School in Lethbridge. Chinook's a brand new high school, 4 years old. Prior to that, I taught at LCI, another large high school here in Lethbridge. Taught there for 10 years. Prior to that, I was out in Tabor at W.R. Myers High School. Taught there for 5 years. Prior to that, I started my career here in Lethbridge doing a bunch of different things, teaching grade 3, 4, and doing some subbing and things like that. So I'm in my 21st year of teaching. I've had the privilege of working a lot with the University of Lethbridge with PS1, PS2, PS3 students, and I'm also an alumnus in terms of my own educational background. I took my undergrad degree as well as finished up my master's degree 3.5 years ago, both wonderful experiences. I've also had the privilege of working with Alberta Education in a number of different capacities. First, in terms of helping to develop the new high school curriculum, which was a very interesting journey to be a part of that process, very long process, but very rewarding to see the evolution of a curriculum document. And also have worked a lot with Alberta Assessment Branch in a whole bunch of different areas as well, from designing questions, item building for both grade 9 and a lot for the Social 30 and 30-1 courses for the diploma exams. I've been a reviewer of exams, also had a lot of opportunities to go up to Edmonton and mark diploma exams as well in both streams at the high school level, which is a tremendous PD to sit in a room with educators from all across the province and to talk about assessing student work and applying scoring rubrics, and it's a great learning experience. Although I do have many reservations about the way that large-scale standardized tests here in Alberta, diploma exams especially, are used, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on. I've also had the privilege of working with the Southern Alberta Professional Development Consortium and the Alberta Assessment Consortium in helping teachers develop authentic assessment tools. I worked with SABDC when the high school curriculum was being implemented at the 30 level and had some really cool experiences there as well. So I've done a lot of reflecting on student assessment, especially in the last 10 years. And then also being a parent of 2 kids that have gone through the education system. My daughter's now a second-year university, and my son's in grade 11. Watching and living through their experience within our system and within different classrooms is quite an experience, and you learn a lot and are forced to reflect a lot on good practice as well. So that's sort of my my own context. So I'll jump to the first question in terms of summative assessments in my classroom, and this has changed a lot. Our new high school curriculum, I call it a new curriculum even though it's been around for a while, is substantially different than the old in that it's outcomes based, and it's very much a skills based curriculum, and that has presented some very big challenges for those of us that used to teach in the old curriculum but now in the new. And but it's been very exciting. I think really good changes have come about as a result of that. And probably the biggest change is the number of summative assessments that I use. It's very small compared to what I used to include within summative assessments, although I would argue now that many of those were not very good summative assessments. And the much fewer that we have are very closely tied to curricular outcomes, and I think we feel very comfortable that they're doing a good job of giving students an opportunity to demonstrate their understanding and their learning. So I'm going to send along a course outline with Curtis, and so you can sort of take a look at, hopefully he can share that with you and you can take a look at some of the things I'm talking about. But as far as our coursework goes, I'm going to send you a copy of what I just gave out to my 2 Social 30-1 classes. We have 2 formal writing tasks, and this is where kids have to demonstrate their understanding through a pretty traditional mode. writing, and we have two different types of assignments, and they're basically mimicking what kids will have to do at the grade 12 level, and with their diploma exams, and those assignments get at some of the major skills that the kids are being asked to develop throughout their high school career, and then culminating, of course, at the grade 12 level. So one of them is a source-based writing assignment where students will have to look at 3 different sources, and those sources, can be written sources, visual sources, political cartoons. They'll have to offer an interpretation of each of those sources, and then the final thing, the synthesis part of it, is they have to then draw relationships amongst the sources, which can be quite challenging for the kids. And then they have to, in the second assignment, they have to look again at another source, a perspective, which is a big part of our curriculum, is having kids look at multiple perspectives on various issues. They have to interpret that and analyze that source and what the perspective is, and then the question is always the same at all 3 grade levels: to what extent should we embrace the perspective of the source? So kids have to write a defensive position essay, essentially describing to what extent they agree with the source's perspective. And again, a really good assignment. I guess the only limitation is that it's a written assignment. That's the only way that they really are allowed to express their understanding. Now, on top of that, so those are 2 assignments, and I should also say at this point that our students actually get 2 attempts essentially at the assignments. They get the assignments well in advance. They're not surprised by the sources. They get to plan and collaborate with their classmates about these sources, and obviously ask teachers questions as well. Then they get what we call basically a formative deadline, which is what we call it. And so if they want some feedback from the teacher, they can essentially attempt the assignment and submit it at the formative deadline. We will either sit down with them during an appointment. We have what's called flex time at school, which allows us to do that. And or we will take their work, read through it, and give them written feedback as well, so that the students will kind of see where their work fits within our scoring rubric. Then they can take it back and they can redo it essentially, and try to learn from the formative feedback that we've given them. And then there is a mastery deadline. So that's the final day that they will be able to rework all of their feedback into their new sort of mastery copy and submit it again. And this is where we will issue them a mark and a grade that will count towards their overall grade. Now, some students skip the formative deadline. They feel very comfortable. Our hope is that all students will use that formative deadline, but some don't, and still do very well because they understand the assignment, the process. And then we also have one more step, which is called the intervention. And this is basically if kids don't hand anything in, then we set up an intervention plan, and they have to fill out a piece of paper that basically describes what they're going to do to basically get that assignment done. And this sort of has evolved out of our sort of no-zero policy type of philosophy, where if it's an important piece of assessment for kids in terms of us understanding their learning and whether or not they've met outcomes, we need to get that piece of work from them. So this is where administration will step in, where we can assign kids flex time to make sure that they're going to get something in that we can assess. And so that's essentially how those writing assignments work. And then in addition to the writing assignments, and this is where I think we've worked really hard to try to give students opportunities that are most meaningful to them in terms of their learning styles and what would be the best way for us or for the student to express their understanding. We've created and asked students to do a minimum of 3 performance-based tasks where they get choice in terms of what they want to do. And as you'll see in the little course outline, we have a whole list of different things that students have done in the past, and this is not the extensive list. They can come up with other ideas if they want, but kids that are good with working with digital media can choose to perhaps do a mini documentary. Kids that are artistic, we've had students do artwork and then have either a verbal or a written explanation of that artwork as it connects to the curricular outcomes that we're going to talk about, propaganda posters, things like that. We've had kids create dioramas, kids that like to work with their hands. We've had kids write music and perform music. So we try to give kids choice in terms of how they present their understanding of concepts through those performance tasks. And those are really, really exciting things to look at as a teacher, and I think they're really good ways as well of assessing whether kids actually get the material that we're asking them to grapple with. So we do, again, 3 of those, and the same process happens in terms of formative feedback and then a mastery deadline as well. So they get, in a sense, a couple of attempts at each of those. And then we also have more traditional assessments that count towards their grade, and those are summative exams. Excuse me. And at the Social 30 level, we actually have 3 to 4 of those, depending. The last time I taught the course, I had 4, because I just found that one of our sort of areas was a little bit weighty compared to the others, so I decided to kind of split it in 2. And those summative exams are comprised of multiple choice, although not a huge number of multiple choice questions. Our multiple choice questions are all source based, so there's that skill element attached to them. They're not just straight knowledge based questions. So between 25 and 35 multiple choice questions, and then 2 or 3 long answer questions or short answer questions where students have the opportunity to write out a response. And again, those are usually connected to some sources where they are having to interpret source information and then apply their understanding of concepts by using those sources. So there's both a written component as well as a multiple choice section as part of those summative assessments. So in all, that's really the only things that count towards their grades are the 2 writing assignments with 2 attempts, the 3 to 4 summative exams, and the 3 performance-based assessments. Those are the only things that go into my grade book to give them a formal mark. Everything else that we do, and there's lots of other things that we do, are all formative things that we do to help scaffold the skills and the understanding to help them be successful on those few summative tasks that we put into the grade book. Now that's substantially different when I look back at the early part of my career. It's a little bit embarrassing right now, to be honest, where I would pride myself on collecting all of these different things, 30 different things in my marks book, but when I look back on it now, many of those things were busy tasks. They weren't really things that were assessing student learning or understanding. And so I think many of us at the high school level have moved well away from that and are now, I think, doing a much better job of creating authentic opportunities for kids to demonstrate their understanding. Now, the last question is about some ways that we communicate student achievement, and this is, to me, the most frustrating part, because I think in our schools we've done a really good job, and in our department in particular, I'm happy to say we've done a really good job of providing a diverse opportunity for students to demonstrate their understanding and give them choice with the performance-based assessments. But when it comes to reporting, we have no opportunity really to report the outcomes that have been met through those processes, and it sort of comes back down to this, and what gets spit out in terms of reporting is a grade, a mark, and that's really frustrating because when you really sit back and think about it, what exactly does 74% in social studies 10 as a midterm mark or a final mark actually mean? And I've actually challenged kids to think about this as well, and they have a tough time wrapping their heads around it. And to me, that's a weakness, not in terms of what we do in our classrooms in terms of assessment, but it's a reporting weakness. And you could say, well, why don't we just change? Why don't we just come up with an outcomes-based reporting system? And we've experimented with that. The problem is that I think students and parents have been trained to not see that as important. And to them, it really is about this normative reference, this mark, right, that they want. So we've experimented with giving them more information in terms of outcomes and where kids are in terms of skill development. But when it comes right down to it, they look at that and they say, that's great, thanks, but what's the mark? And I think that's buoyed also by the fact that at the school level and even at the provincial level, at high school especially, we have to report a mark. We can't really put in an incomplete if students haven't met all of these assessment tasks that we ask them to do. We have to generate a mark. And this is where the no zero thing comes in, because how do you report something if a student has chosen not to do it or hand it in? And the reason for that is that high schools generate credits, CEUs, and that's how we get money for funding our schools. And the only way that we can claim credits or funding is by submitting a mark to Alberta Education. So we're sort of caught in this antiquated sort of paradigm, I guess, of reporting that I think for many teachers is frustrating, because we do all these great things in our classroom, but when it comes down to reporting, we have to report a mark, which I don't think tells anybody very much about what's happening within our classrooms. So I'm hoping that high school redesign is going to bring about some changes in those areas, because it is a real frustration for many of us that have worked very hard at changing our assessment practice, and I think are pretty proud of what we do. But unfortunately, it all gets oversimplified with a grade. And part of that as well is I think grades are reinforced, and the importance of a mark is reinforced also with the diploma exam, and I could get off on a rant about those as well, being so heavily weighted towards a student's final grade in a class, that that mark, that grade, becomes again reinforced as the most important thing for students, not necessarily about meeting outcomes and about student learning, and it's again about that mark. So anyway, hopefully this has been useful, has been a way to maybe spark some discussion, and who knows, maybe our conversation will continue at some point. So thanks, good luck in your journey, in your course, and take care.